I need to tell you something that will completely change how you think about failure. Something that, once you understand it, will free you from the paralysis that's been keeping you stuck. Something that successful people know but rarely talk about. Successful people fail more than you do, not less, more. They fail more often. They fail bigger. They fail publicly. They fail repeatedly. They accumulate failure after failure after failure. And that's exactly why they're successful. Right now, you probably think the opposite. You think successful people are successful because they avoid failure, because they're talented enough to get things right the first time, because they make smart decisions that lead to success and avoid failure, because they have some special ability to see the winning path and take it. But that's completely backward. Successful people don't avoid failure, they seek it, they create it, they learn from it, they use it as data. They treat failure as feedback rather than as a verdict, and they fail so many times that eventually they succeed. Think about the most successful person you know personally or admire from afar. Now think about how many times they've failed. Not just small failures, major failures, business failures, relationship failures, project failures, public embarrassments, rejected proposals, failed attempts, costly mistakes. If they're truly successful, the list of their failures is longer than yours, not because they're worse at what they do, but because they've tried more things, attempted more goals, put themselves in more situations where failure was possible, taken more risks, made more attempts. And here's the paradox. The reason you haven't failed as much is probably the same reason you haven't succeeded as much. You've been avoiding failure, playing it safe, only attempting things you're confident you can succeed at, staying in your comfort zone, not putting yourself in situations where you might fail. And by avoiding failure, you've also avoided the very process that creates success. Because success doesn't come from avoiding failure. Success comes from failing repeatedly until you learn enough to succeed. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the prerequisite for success. But somewhere along the way, you learn that failure is bad. Failure means you're incompetent. Failure means you should be ashamed. Failure means you're not good enough. Failure is something to avoid at all costs. Better to not try at all than to try and fail. And that belief has kept you small. It's kept you safe, maybe, but it's also kept you stuck. It's kept you from attempting the things you actually want to attempt. It's kept you from learning what you can only learn through failure. It's kept you from accumulating the failed attempts that eventually lead to success. My name doesn't matter, but my failures do. Because I spent 38 years terrified of failure, avoiding it, playing it safe, only attempting things I was confident I could succeed at. And that terror of failure kept me from achieving anything significant, until I learned the failure paradox, until I understood that the people I admired most had failed far more than I had, until I stopped avoiding failure and started seeking it, until I realized that every failure was bringing me closer to success, not further from it. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why successful people fail more than you do. I'm going to reveal how your fear of failure is guaranteeing your mediocrity. I'm going to share my journey from failure avoider to failure seeker. And most importantly, I'm going to give you the exact framework to reframe failure from something to avoid into something to embrace. But I need you to be ready for something uncomfortable. Seeking failure means being willing to look foolish, to be embarrassed, to make mistakes in front of others, to try things you might not succeed at, to risk your ego for the possibility of growth. Are you ready for that discomfort? Are you ready to fail more so you can succeed more? Are you ready to embrace the failure paradox? Then let's begin. Because the difference between where you are and where you want to be is probably just a lot more failures. Let me take you to the moment I realized my fear of failure was destroying my potential. I was 38 years old, sitting in a coffee shop, watching a 24-year-old entrepreneur pitch his startup idea to potential investors at the next table. His pitch wasn't perfect. He stumbled over some words. He didn't have answers to all their questions. He was clearly nervous, but he was pitching anyway, putting himself out there, risking rejection, willing to fail in front of people. And I realized I had never done that. I had never put myself in a situation where I might fail publicly. I had never pitched an idea to investors. I had never started a business that might not work. I had never attempted anything where failure was a real possibility. Not because I didn't have ideas. I had dozens of ideas, business ideas, creative projects, career moves, goals I wanted to pursue, but I never pursued them because I might fail. And if I might fail, I thought it was better not to try. So instead, I stayed in a safe corporate job for 15 years, a job I could do competently, a job where I rarely failed because I rarely attempted anything challenging, a job that was slowly killing my spirit but keeping my ego safe. I had been congratulating myself on not failing. I thought my lack of failure meant I was doing well, that I was smart for avoiding risky situations, that I was successful because I wasn't failing. But watching that 24-year-old pitch his imperfect idea, I saw the truth. He was going to succeed at life in ways I never would. Not because his idea was better, not because he was smarter, but because he was willing to fail, and I wasn't. Let me show you the specific ways my fear of failure had been controlling my life for decades, because I guarantee you're trapped in some version of the same patterns. Failure avoidance strategy. 1. Only attempting things I was confident I could succeed at. I only took on projects where I already had proven competence. I only pursued goals that felt achievable. I only put myself in situations where success was likely. This sounds smart. It sounds like good planning. It sounds like being strategic and realistic about your capabilities. But here's what it actually was. It was guaranteeing I would never grow. Because you only grow by attempting things you're not yet competent at, by trying things where success isn't certain, by putting yourself in situations where failure is possible. I'd been working in marketing for 15 years, doing essentially the same type of work. I was good at it. I succeeded at it consistently. But I wasn't learning anything new because I wasn't attempting anything where I might fail. Failure avoidance strategy. 2. Over-preparing before taking action. When I did have to attempt something new, I would prepare excessively, research everything, plan every detail, anticipate every possible problem, make sure I was as ready as possible before taking action. Again, this sounds smart. It sounds like due diligence. It sounds like being thorough and responsible. But here's what it actually was. It was delay. It was perfectionism masquerading as preparation. I was trying to eliminate all possibility of failure before I started. And since you can never eliminate all possibility of failure, I often never started at all. I spent 3 years preparing to launch a consulting business, reading books about entrepreneurship, taking courses on business planning, researching the market, creating the perfect business plan, but never actually launching, because I kept finding more things to prepare for, more knowledge I needed, more certainty I required. That 3 years of preparation was just 3 years of failure avoidance. Failure avoidance strategy 3, quitting at the first sign of difficulty. When I did attempt something new and it got difficult, I would interpret difficulty as a sign that I was failing. And if I was failing, I should quit before the failure became obvious to others. I started learning Spanish when I was 32. It was hard. I struggled with verb conjugations. I made mistakes when speaking. I felt foolish not being fluent immediately. So after 3 months, I quit. I told myself I wasn't good at languages, that Spanish wasn't important to my goals anyway, that I'd try again someday when I had more time. But the truth was simpler. I quit because I was failing at the beginning stages of learning, and I interpreted that inevitable failure as evidence I should stop rather than as evidence I was learning. Failure avoidance strategy. 4. Staying in my zone of existing competence. I built my entire life around things I already knew how to do well. My job used skills I'd already developed. My hobbies were things I was already good at. My social life involved people who knew me in roles where I was competent. I never put myself in situations where I'd be a beginner, where I'd be incompetent, where I'd struggle publicly, because being a beginner means failing a lot, and I was terrified of failure. So I stayed in my narrow zone of competence, safe, unchallenged, stagnant. Failure avoidance strategy. 5. Making myself small to avoid judgment. I had big ideas, big goals, big ambitions, but I kept them to myself. Because if I shared them and then failed to achieve them, people would judge me. People would think I was arrogant for having big goals. People would see my failure. So I made my goals small and achievable. I kept my ambitions private. I stayed small enough that failure wasn't visible. And I told myself this was humility. But it wasn't humility. It was cowardice. I was sacrificing my potential to protect my ego. Failure avoidance strategy. 6. Rationalizing non-attempts as realism. Every time I didn't attempt something because I feared failure, I created a rationalization. I wasn't not trying because I was scared. I was being realistic about my limitations. I was being smart about resource allocation. I was being mature about what was possible. I told myself it wasn't realistic to start a business at 35. I told myself it wasn't practical to change careers. I told myself it wasn't feasible to pursue creative projects. I called all of this realism. But it was just fear with a sophisticated vocabulary. Failure avoidance strategy 7. Comparing my failures to others' successes. When I did fail at something, I would compare my failure to other people's successes in that area. I'd see someone succeeding at exactly what I'd failed at and use that as evidence that I wasn't good enough. I tried to start a podcast when I was 36. I recorded 5 episodes. They weren't very good. My delivery was awkward. I got almost no listeners, so I quit. And I told myself, see? Other people are naturally good at podcasting. I'm not. This isn't for me. But I was comparing my 5th attempt to their 500th attempt. I was comparing my beginner efforts to their experienced execution. And using that unfair comparison to justify quitting, these 7 strategies created a life where I rarely failed, but I also rarely succeeded at anything meaningful. I was competent, safe, comfortable, stagnant, and deeply unfulfilled. I looked at successful people with envy, wondering how they managed to achieve so much, assuming they had some natural talent I lacked, some intelligence or charisma or luck that explained their success. But sitting in that coffee shop, watching that 24-year-old pitch his imperfect idea, I finally understood they didn't have something I lacked. They were just willing to do something I refused to do. They were willing to fail over and over and over until they succeeded. And I had been protecting my ego from failure while simultaneously guaranteeing I would never achieve anything significant. I went home from that coffee shop and I did something I'd never done before. I made a list of all the things I had not attempted in my adult life because I was afraid of failing. The list was devastating. 47 things. 47 goals, dreams, projects, opportunities I had avoided because failure was possible. Starting a business, writing a book, learning a musical instrument, public speaking, asking for promotions, pitching ideas to leadership, starting a podcast, learning to code, taking art classes, joining a sports league, asking someone on a date, traveling solo, learning a new language, applying for stretch positions, submitting writing to publications, creating YouTube videos, teaching workshops, starting a side project, launching a blog, networking with industry leaders, attending conferences alone, joining professional associations, volunteering to lead initiatives, proposing new programs, creating courses, mentoring others publicly, writing LinkedIn articles, cold emailing people I admired, asking for what I wanted directly. 47 opportunities for growth, learning, and potential success that I had sacrificed to avoid failure. And for every one of these non-attempts, I had a rationalization, a story about why it was smart not to try, a sophisticated explanation for why avoidance was actually wisdom. But the rationalizations were just fear. And the fear had cost me 15 years of potential growth, 15 years of learning, 15 years of failing and improving and eventually succeeding. The successful people I envied, they had spent those same 15 years attempting things, failing at many of them, learning from the failures, improving, trying again, failing again, learning more, improving more, until eventually they succeeded. They didn't have more talent, they had more failures, and those failures had taught them how to succeed. The day after I made my list of 47 non-attempts, I made a decision. I was going to start seeking failure instead of avoiding it. I was going to deliberately put myself in situations where I might fail. I was going to attempt things I wasn't confident I could succeed at. I was going to embrace failure as a necessary step towards success. But I didn't know how to do this, because for 38 years, my entire approach to life had been organized around failure avoidance. Seeking failure felt like deliberately hurting myself. So I started small. I asked myself, what's one thing from my list of 47 that I could attempt this month, knowing I'll probably fail at it? The answer? Public speaking. I was terrified of public speaking. I avoided it religiously. I had turned down multiple opportunities to present at work because I was afraid of failing in front of people. So I did the opposite of what I'd always done. I sought out an opportunity to fail publicly. I joined Toastmasters, a public speaking club where beginners go to practice and, inevitably, fail at speaking. My first speech was at my second meeting. I had 1 week to prepare a 5-minute speech on any topic. I over-prepared, naturally. I wrote the speech, I memorized it, I practiced it 20 times. I tried to eliminate all possibility of failure. But here's what happened when I gave the speech. I forgot my memorized words 30 seconds in. I panicked, I stammered, I lost my place. I said approximately 50 times. I exceeded my time limit by 2 minutes. I rushed through the ending because I was so uncomfortable. It was a disaster, a complete failure by any measure. And you know what happened next? Nothing bad. The group applauded anyway. Several people gave me feedback on what I could improve. One person told me my topic was interesting even though my delivery needed work. And I survived. I had failed publicly in front of 20 people. And the world didn't end. I wasn't humiliated. I wasn't destroyed. I just got feedback and was invited to try again in 2 weeks. That experience was revelatory because I realized failure isn't what I thought it was. I thought failure was a verdict, a final judgment that I wasn't good enough, a permanent mark against me. But failure was just feedback, information about what worked and what didn't, data I could use to improve, a necessary step in the learning process. 2 weeks later, I gave another speech. It was better than the first. Still not good, but better. I remembered more of my content. I said fewer times. I stayed closer to the time limit. After 6 months and 12 speeches, I was actually decent. Not great, but competent. And after a year and 24 speeches, I was good. I could speak in front of groups without panic. I could structure a talk. I could engage an audience. But that improvement didn't come from avoiding failure. It came from failing repeatedly. My first speech was terrible. My third speech was mediocre. My 10th speech was decent. My 20th speech was good. If I had quit after the first failure, I'd still be terrified of public speaking. But I didn't quit. I accepted failure as part of the process, and the process worked. Encouraged by this success, I started seeking failure in other areas. Failure seeking. I started the business I'd been preparing for, not after more preparation. With the preparation I already had, which meant I was guaranteed to fail at many aspects of it. And I did fail. I priced my services wrong initially. I targeted the wrong market segment at first. My initial website was terrible. My first client pitch was awkward. My first few client engagements revealed gaps in my process. Each of these was a failure, but each failure taught me something. I adjusted my pricing after failing to get clients at my initial rate. I refined my target market after failing with the wrong segment. I improved my website after seeing how the bad one performed. I practiced pitching after bombing my first attempts. I developed better processes after failing with my initial approach. After 6 months and many failures, I had a functioning business. Not because I'd avoided failure, but because I'd failed enough times to learn what worked. Failure seeking. 3. I wrote articles and submitted them to publications. I got rejected 23 times before getting my first acceptance. Each rejection was a failure. But each rejection also came with brief feedback about why the piece didn't fit. And I used that feedback to improve my writing and pitching. Article 24 got accepted. Not because I suddenly became a better writer, but because the previous 23 failures had taught me what editors wanted. Failure seeking. 4. I started learning to code, something I'd always wanted to do but had avoided because I assumed I'd be bad at it, and I was bad at it. My first 100 programs didn't work. They had bugs, they crashed, they did weird things I didn't understand. But I kept writing code, kept debugging, kept learning. Each failed program taught me something. After 6 months, I could write programs that worked, not because I had natural talent, but because I'd failed at writing code hundreds of times and learned from each failure. Failure seeking. 5. I applied for positions I wasn't qualified for, stretch roles that I wanted but didn't meet the requirements for. I got rejected from 17 positions. Each rejection was technically a failure. But position 18 resulted in an interview, and that interview led to a job offer. Not because I suddenly became qualified, but because I was willing to fail at 17 applications to learn how to succeed at the 18th. As I accumulated these failures, something interesting happened. My fear of failure decreased, not because I was failing less, but because I was failing more and realizing it wasn't as bad as I'd feared. Each failure was uncomfortable in the moment, but it wasn't devastating. It wasn't permanent. It wasn't a verdict on my worth. It was just feedback. And feedback, while sometimes bruising to the ego, was incredibly valuable for improvement. I also started noticing something about the successful people I admired. When I looked closely at their histories, they had all failed massively, multiple times. The successful entrepreneur I knew had started 4 businesses. 3 of them failed completely. The 4th succeeded. The best-selling author I admired had written 7 novels. The first 6 were rejected by every publisher. The 7th became a bestseller. The executive I respected had been fired from 2 jobs early in her career, both times for performance issues. She learned from both failures and eventually became a CEO. The musician I followed had released 4 albums that sold almost no copies. The 5th album went platinum. Every successful person I studied had a long list of failures. Longer than my list. More significant than my failures. More public than mine. But they hadn't let those failures stop them. They'd used those failures as learning experiences and kept attempting until they succeeded. And I realized The difference between me and them wasn't talent or intelligence or luck. It was willingness to fail. They had been willing to accumulate failures on the path to success. I had been trying to reach success without going through failure. After 2 years of deliberately seeking failure, my life looked completely different. I had a successful consulting business. I was a competent public speaker. I had published 15 articles in various publications. I could code well enough to build useful programs. I had gotten a position I wasn't initially qualified for. But more importantly, my relationship with failure had completely transformed. I was no longer terrified of it. I expected it. I valued it. I sought it out as a necessary part of growth. I had failed more in those 2 years than in the previous 38. And I had succeeded more too, because the failures and successes were connected. You can't have the successes without going through the failures. After transforming my relationship with failure, I developed what I call the failure framework. This is the system that helps you reframe failure from something to avoid into something to embrace as a necessary part of success. The framework has 7 components, and each one is essential. Component 1, the failure inventory. You need to identify specifically what you've been avoiding because failure was possible. Most people have never done this inventory. The practice: make 3 lists. List 1, things I've wanted to attempt but haven't because I might fail. Write everything. Business ideas, career changes, creative projects, learning goals, relationship initiatives, personal challenges. Everything you've avoided because failure was possible. List 2, things I started but quit when failure seemed imminent. Write every project you abandoned, every goal you gave up on, every attempt you made but stopped when it got difficult. List 3, opportunities I've declined because success wasn't certain. Write every invitation you turned down, every application you didn't submit, every pitch you didn't make because you weren't confident you'd succeed. My 3 lists totaled 93 items, 93 opportunities for growth and learning and potential success that I'd sacrificed to avoid failure. This inventory shows you exactly how much your fear of failure has cost you. Component 2, the failure reframe. You need to change how you think about failure. From verdict to feedback, from ending to beginning, from catastrophe to information. The old thinking: failure means I'm not good enough. Failure is embarrassing. Failure is something to avoid. Failure is the opposite of success. The new thinking: failure is feedback. Failure is data that helps me improve. Failure is a necessary step towards success. Failure is how I learn. The opposite of success isn't failure. It's not attempting. The practice. For every item on your failure inventory, write a reframe statement. I've been avoiding this because I might fail, but failure at this isn't a verdict on my worth. It's feedback that will help me improve. The only way to learn this is to fail at it repeatedly until I succeed. Example: I've been avoiding public speaking because I might embarrass myself. But failing at a speech isn't a verdict that I'm a bad speaker. It's feedback on what to improve. The only way to become a good speaker is to give bad speeches until I learn. This reframe changes failure from something to fear into something to expect and use. Component 3, the failure budget. Just like you budget money, you need to budget failures. Decide how many failures you'll pursue in a given area to reach competence. The practice. For each goal from your inventory, set a failure budget. How many times are you willing to fail at this before you evaluate whether to continue? Example: I will give 20 public speeches, even if all 20 are bad, before I evaluate whether to continue. Example: I will submit 30 articles to publications, even if all 30 get rejected, before I evaluate whether to continue. Example: I will write 100 programs, even if all 100 have bugs, before I evaluate whether to continue. This budget removes the temptation to quit after the first failure. You've committed to a specific number of failures before you even evaluate success. This gives learning time to happen. I set a budget of 25 failures for learning to speak publicly. I used all 25, but by failure 25, I was actually decent. The budget kept me going when early failures made me want to quit. Component 4, the failure log. You need to document your failures and what you learned from them. This transforms failures from shameful events to valuable data. The practice. Keep a failure log. Every time you fail at something, document. What I attempted, how I failed. What I learned from this failure, what I'll adjust for the next attempt. My failure log has 237 entries over 3 years. Each one represents a failure that taught me something. Each one represents progress toward eventual success. Looking back through my failure log, I can see clear progression. Failure 1 at public speaking. I forgot my content and panicked. What I learned, I shouldn't memorize speeches word for word. What I adjusted, I started using note cards with key points instead. Failure 7 at public speaking. I used too many note cards and got lost in them. What I learned, fewer notes are better than more. What I adjusted, I reduced to 3 note cards maximum. Each failure built on the previous one. Each failure brought me closer to competence. Component 5, the failure accountability. When you fail privately, it's easier to quit. When you fail publicly with accountability, you're more likely to persist. The practice. Tell people about your attempts before you make them, not for their approval, for accountability. Say, I'm going to attempt this thing. I'll probably fail at it multiple times before I succeed. I wanted you to know so you can check in on my progress. I told 3 friends about my commitment to give 25 speeches. They checked in monthly. Knowing they were watching made it harder to quit after early failures. This accountability doesn't prevent failure, it prevents quitting. Component 6, the comparison correction. You need to stop comparing your failures to others' successes. This comparison is why many people quit. The practice. When you fail and feel tempted to compare yourself to someone succeeding in that area, use the comparison correction. I'm comparing my attempt number X to their attempt number Y. They've failed many more times than I have. They're further along the learning curve. My job is to keep failing until I get to where they are. Example, I tried to start a business and failed to get clients in my first month. I looked at successful consultants and felt inadequate. Then I applied the comparison correction. I'm comparing my first month to their 5th year. They failed to get clients many times too. They just kept trying. My job is to keep attempting until I learn what they learned. This correction prevents the unfair comparison that causes premature quitting. Component 7, the success attribution. When you eventually succeed after multiple failures, you need to attribute your success correctly, not to talent or luck, to the failures that taught you. The practice. When you succeed at something you failed at multiple times, document the connection. I succeeded at this after failing at it this many times. My success came from the lessons those failures taught me. Without those failures, this success wouldn't exist. This attribution reinforces that failure and success are connected. That failure isn't the opposite of success, but the path to it. After I gave my 50th speech, and it went well, I wrote, "This good speech exists because of the 49 bad speeches that taught me how to speak. My success today is built on my failures yesterday." These 7 components create a complete system for embracing failure as a necessary and valuable part of achieving success. Now you understand how to transform your relationship with failure. Let me give you the exact action plan to start seeking failure instead of avoiding it. Action 1. Complete your failure inventory this week. Make your 3 lists. Things I haven't attempted because I might fail. Things I quit when failure seemed imminent. Opportunities I declined because success wasn't certain. Get them all visible. This shows you what fear of failure has cost you. Action 2. Choose one item from your inventory to attempt. Not the scariest, not the easiest, the one that would create the most meaningful growth if you succeeded at it. This is your failure-seeking project. Action 3. Write your reframe statement for this item. Use the format. I've been avoiding this because I might fail, but failure at this isn't a verdict on my worth. It's feedback that will help me improve. The only way to learn this is to fail at it repeatedly until I succeed. Put this where you'll see it when fear comes up. Action 4. Set your failure budget. How many times are you willing to fail at this before you evaluate? Not how many times until you expect success. How many failures you'll commit to before you even consider quitting. Write this commitment. I will attempt this thing at least this many times, even if I fail every time, before I evaluate whether to continue. Action 5. Make your first attempt this week, not when you feel ready, this week. Schedule it, put it on your calendar, then do it, expecting to fail. Your goal isn't to succeed. Your goal is to make attempt number 1 and gather feedback from the failure. Action 6. Start your failure log. Get a notebook or document, title it Failure Log. After your first attempt, document what I attempted, how I failed, what I learned, what I'll adjust for next attempt. This transforms failure from shameful event to valuable data. Action 7. Tell one person about your failure-seeking project. Say, I'm attempting this thing. I expect to fail at it multiple times before I succeed. I'm telling you for accountability. Please check in with me monthly about whether I'm still attempting it. Having an accountability partner makes it harder to quit after early failures. Action 8. Schedule your next 5 attempts. Before you even make your first attempt, schedule the next 5. Put them all on your calendar. This commits you to multiple attempts regardless of how the first one goes. This prevents quitting after the first failure. Action 9. Practice the comparison correction. When you fail and feel tempted to compare yourself to someone succeeding in that area, write, I'm comparing my attempt number X to their attempt number Y. They failed many more times than I have. My job is to keep failing until I learn what they learned. Use this every time comparison makes you want to quit. Action 10. Celebrate your failures. After each failure, acknowledge, I failed today. That means I'm learning. That means I'm attempting things that matter. That means I'm making progress toward eventual success. Reframe each failure as evidence of effort rather than evidence of inadequacy. Action 11. Review your failure log weekly. Once per week, read through your failures and lessons learned. See the progression. See how each failure taught you something. See how you're improving through the failures. This reinforces that failure is working. Action 12. Add a second failure-seeking project after 3 months. Once you've been pursuing your first project for 3 months, add a second item from your inventory. Now you're seeking failure in 2 areas. This normalizes failure as part of your life rather than a special project. Action 13. Share one failure publicly. Post about it on social media or tell it in a conversation. Not for sympathy, to normalize failure. Say, I attempted this thing. I failed at it. Here's what I learned. I'm trying again. Sharing failures publicly breaks the shame and helps others see failure as normal. Action 14. Find one successful person's failure history. Research someone you admire. Dig into their history. Find their failures. Document them. See how many times they failed before succeeding. Use this evidence to remind yourself that success requires failure. Action. 15. Commit to the failure-seeking lifestyle. Write this commitment. I commit to attempting things where failure is possible. I commit to failing repeatedly at things that matter. I commit to learning from failures instead of being stopped by them. I commit to seeking failure as a necessary part of seeking success. Sign it, date it. This is your declaration. Now, some of you are thinking, but what if I fail so many times that I never succeed? What if I'm not capable of learning from failure? What if seeking failure just means accumulating failures with no success? Here's my answer. That's possible, but it's far less likely than you think. Most people quit too soon, not too late. They fail 3 times and quit, when success might have come at attempt 7. And here's what's certain. If you never attempt because you're afraid of failure, you're guaranteed not to succeed. If you attempt repeatedly despite failures, you might succeed. The second option has better odds. The question isn't whether you'll fail. You will. The question is whether you'll fail enough times to learn what you need to learn to eventually succeed. Let me tell you where I am now, 5 years after I stopped avoiding failure and started seeking it. I've failed 472 times. I counted. Documented failures in my failure log. Failed speeches, failed pitches, failed business approaches, failed articles, failed programs, failed attempts at new skills, failed initiatives. 472 failures in 5 years. And you know what else I have? More successes than in the previous 38 years combined. A thriving business built on dozens of failed approaches that taught me what works. Published articles in major publications after being rejected by them multiple times. The ability to speak confidently in front of hundreds of people after bombing speeches in front of dozens. Skills I've developed through hundreds of failed attempts. Opportunities I've gotten by applying despite likely rejection. My success isn't despite my failures, it's because of them. Every failure taught me something. Every failed speech taught me how to speak better. Every rejected article taught me how to write better. Every failed business approach taught me what clients actually need. Every failed attempt at a new skill taught me how to learn more effectively. I succeeded because I failed more than most people are willing to fail. 5 years ago, I was terrified of failure. I avoided it at all costs. I only attempted things I was confident I could succeed at, and that terror kept me safe, comfortable, and completely stuck. Today, I seek failure. I deliberately attempt things I might fail at. I put myself in situations where failure is likely. I fail regularly and publicly. And that willingness to fail has led to more success than I ever achieved by avoiding failure. Here's what I've learned. Successful people aren't more talented than you. They're more willing to fail than you. They've accumulated more failures. They've learned more lessons. They've tried more approaches. They've persisted through more setbacks. The entrepreneur you admire, they've failed at more businesses than you've attempted. The author you love, they've been rejected more times than you've submitted. The speaker you respect, they've given more bad speeches than you've given speeches at all. The executive you aspire to be, they've failed at more projects than you've attempted. They're not successful because they avoid failure. They're successful because they fail more than you. They fail forward. They fail fast. They fail and learn and try again. And that's available to you, not 5 years from now, starting today. The moment you stop trying to avoid failure and start seeking it as a necessary part of growth, what are you not attempting right now because you might fail? What goal are you avoiding? What dream are you suppressing? What opportunity are you declining because success isn't guaranteed? That's your failure-seeking project. That's where you start. Attempt it. Expect to fail. Document the failure. Learn from it. Try again. Fail again. Learn more. Try again. Keep failing until you succeed. That's how success works. Not by avoiding failure, by going through enough failures to learn what you need to learn to succeed. 5 years ago, I had failed very few times and succeeded at very few things. Today, I've failed 472 times and succeeded at dozens of meaningful goals. The failures and successes are connected. You can't have one without the other. So stop avoiding failure. Start seeking it. Fail more, learn more, succeed more. That's the failure paradox. The more you fail, the more you succeed. The less you fail, the less you succeed. Successful people fail more than you, not because they're worse at what they do, because they attempt more, risk more, learn more, grow more. You can do the same. Starting today, with your first deliberate failure, 5 years from now, you could have a long list of failures that taught you how to succeed, or you could have a short list of non-attempts that kept you safe and stuck. The choice is yours, but I know which list leads to the life you actually want. Start failing, start learning, start succeeding. The failure paradox is waiting for you to embrace it.